Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back to science. All right, so today we're going to be talking about the organs of the respiratory system. This is going to be one of the longer sections, but we're going to look at the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. So these two areas, you've heard things like it's an upper respiratory infection or they have bronchitis. You've heard those words before, and these are divisions of categorically of the respiratory system. So as air flows in, it's going to continue down to our lungs. And so you're going to have an upper portion, which is the upper respiratory tract, and a lower respiratory tract. So upper respiratory tract includes nose, nasal cavity, sinuses, pharynx, and larynx. The lower respiratory tract is going to be the trachea, bronchial tree, and the lungs. Here is a cross section to show that. We can see a few other things like the sinuses identified here. So we have frontal sinus, we have the sphenoid sinus, ethmoid sinus, can't see from this angle. Maxillary sinus is going to be in this area, can't see that as well. We'll get to the sinuses in just a moment. So I digress. And we have nasal passage where you're going to have the pharynx. We're going to have, eventually, we're going to move into the larynx area. And then we're moving from esophageal, where we've been undigested. Now we're going to move to the front side of things, which is going to be the larynx side of things. And so you're going to have, the Adam's apple that we'll see in a minute. Then we see the trachea, the hilum, then the bronchioles, and then to the right and left lung. A thing to notice here is that there's 3 right lungs and 2 left lungs. Think about why that may be. I'll answer that question in just a minute. All right, so the nostrils. This is part of our nose, and it's going to open up into our nasal cavity. So the nasal cavity is going to really protect us from things, particulates that are in the air. In the air around you right now, there's so many particles that are not oxygen, that's not nitrogen, that's not carbon dioxide. It's other things like those gases I just mentioned don't have an odor. And I'm betting that if you walk into any location, you pick up a particular smell. Those are different chemicals that are available in the air. Once you get into the nasal cavity, this is going to be the area behind the nose. So the nose is going to be cartilaginous in nature until it goes up to about this point where it reaches the nasal bone. So that's one of the facial bones. So if you cut that off, you would look into and you would look like one of the Marvel characters. But now that you're into the nasal septum, we know that we have the superior, middle, and inferior nasal concha. These are going to be these tuberate bones that are sticking out in the nose. And just like you would anticipate, that's going to increase surface area. And the more surface area, it's going to act just as that. It's going to give more surface for us to deal with the things that are coming in. Now, the nasal concha, they're not involved in the smelling part of breathing in through your nose. That would be up towards the top on the cribriform plate by the crista galli, where you have that olfactory bulb with those olfaction, part of those hairs that are hair nerves that are hanging down. Not hairs, but hair-like nerves. All right. Anyway, so the nasal concha are going to have the tuberate bones that are going off laterally into these areas. The nasal concha separate the nasal cavity into the meatuses. So the upper portion is where you're going to have the olfactory receptors for smell. Now, throughout all of our nose, we have a lot of mucous membrane, and the mucous membrane is going to have the star of the show being the pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. So, pseudostratified, it's going to be like it's stacked on top of each other, but we know that since it's pseudostratified, instead of just being columnar epithelium, these are going to kind of be kind of wine goblet shaped as they go down to a point, and some of them are going to have different shapes, but their ultimate thing is to produce mucus. And you're like, oh, gross. Mucus is an unsung hero. You don't see a lot of songs written about mucus, so I think this is legit. So, the thing about mucus is it's a polar substance. And as you breathe in those chemicals, many of those are polar, they're going to stick to a polar substance. So now you've got it in a sticky trap. The sticky trap that is our mucus, and mucus is continually running down the back of our throat. Even if you're healthy, you're going to have that mucus running down the back of your throat. If you notice, you are swallowing all the time. So you're sitting here right now thinking like, well, don't swallow. I kind of need to swallow. Why am I needing to swallow? I don't have anything. I haven't eaten anything. Why am I swallowing? So the reason that you're swallowing, part of it is that mucus discharge that's going down the back of your throat. You're swallowing it. Instead of letting it go all the way to your trachea, you're going to swallow it, closing off the epiglottis, sending it down the chute to the esophagus, to the stomach, And the reason we're sending it to the stomach is that we can reabsorb most of the liquids of that mucus, and any kind of particle that we want eliminated, it's going to send it to the hydrochloric acid and it's going to hydrolyze it, breaking it to bits, meaning it is ultimately unable to harm you. So most of the things that are getting trapped in our nasal passage, we're swallowing. Occasionally, some of it's going to harden, and we're going to know that as, our boogers. Yuck. All right, so cilia are going to be continually sweeping. So those are the hair-like projections that are on the outside of those hair cells. Don't pet them; they're not friendly. This mucus is going to be essentially moved in a direction. So imagine you're at a concert, because that's what we do, and you're the performer. Better yet, and as you go and crowd surf, where they're like pushing you across in a direction toward the exit, in this mythical dystopian world, um, those arms that are helping move you with directionality, that would represent the cilia. And they do this with that mucus to have directionality to it, instead of just kind of setting there stuck. Instead, it's continually moving that. So it's more than just gravity allowing that to fall down your throat. It's also that part. So another part in the nasal cavity is it's going to warm the air. Remember, you're 98.6. So as you breathe that in, you're warming that up to your body temperature. And it's also going to moisten it. So sorry that I'm using the word moist. At least I'm not saying flesh. But now it's going to have this moisture content. So this moist air, as it's moving in, this is going to stick to your mucus, allowing for it to be passed away down your stomach. So the nasal concha are going to just increase the surface area that's involved and helping mucus cover a larger area without needing a bigger nose, because Lord knows I don't need a bigger nose. Here are the nasal conchas, superior, middle, and inferior. You can see the different areas there. They increase the surface area. So nasal concha, superstars of the show, mucus being produced and running down the back of your throat. Yuck. But it's saving you. I mean, think of all the infections that you would have. Some of them may be even lethal. Life expectancy would be way different. And we'll look at some examples of when people have things that don't quite work right. So here are those cilia that are on the outmost region. Here's the pseudostratified ciliated epithelium. See how they kind of come down to a point, but they go all the way to the surface. That makes them not stratified. They're stratified, but they're not stratified. So this is pseudo stratified, and we can see they're ciliated, and there's mucus all over them. Yucky, yucky, yucky. And then we see this particle that is crowd surfing, moving down, down, down to the ring of fire. All right. So the sinuses. Sinuses are also called paranasal sinuses. These are air-filled sacs. Here are some of the sinuses in our body. So we have maxillary sinus. If you have a sinus infection, most likely the one you think of is the one right above your teeth, your maxilla bone. So whenever you have a sinus infection, like, that. So that is the maxillary sinus that you're experiencing. You also have the frontal sinus that's here, and I'm not going to touch the other sinuses because it's back. So if you go this way and back even further, you get to your ethmoid sinus within your ethmoid bone. And then if you go over and back a little bit, you get into your sphenoid sinus. Once again, they are air-filled cavities. Typically, this isn't a problem, having an air-filled cavity. Matter of fact, it helps your head weigh lighter than it would. If it's dense bone, it would be a much heavier structure. You don't need that. So it reduces the weight of the skull. That's going to help your voice resonate. Sometimes when there's infection, these areas get clogged, and then you have increased pressure in these areas. This is sinusitis. Oftentimes you see this in response to allergic reaction or blockage of a sinus drainage, causing sinus pressure and eventually a headache. No fun. All right, maxillary sinus, frontal sinus, ethmoid sinus, sphenoidal sinuses. So you can see those different sinuses that are there. Here's the maxillary sinus that you can see from behind. You can also see by the x-ray where it's not as dense in color. There's still bone there, but it's not as dense of a bone. There's going to be these pockets that are within. All right, smokers, for starters, stop it. Okay, I've said my piece there. So the respiratory system, damage from smoking is slow, progressive, and sometimes deadly. If smoking was deadly every time, you wouldn't have anybody that do it. But it is slow to harm you. And then you have people that get addicted, and that should be illegal for the companies that are causing people to get addicted. I think that um, these are some of the things that, like, how is that not corrupt? How is that not suable? Where, like, hey, I used your product and I was damaged, and you caused me to get addicted to your product. I want to sue you. I think that would be like a reasonable thing, but I don't know. The world we live in. So something that harms you, that is supposed to get you addicted, and yeah, yeah. So smoking slows and eventually paralyzes the cilia. So the crowd surfing, not cool. Doesn't happen. Dirt and pathogens, they don't get worked through the respiratory system to the digestive system. Instead, they end up in your respiratory system. Your respiratory system, with all of that excess mucus, instead of being sent to our stomach, being sent to our lungs, is going to cause the smoker's cough. If you've been around a smoker when they wake up early in the morning, a lot of times this debris has settled into the lungs, and then they have to cough several times, clearing the passageway, because that's what coughs are doing. It's taking something and it's forcing air. As you think about it, it's a force of air that's moving any of the liquid debris that's there up and out. Notice that every time you cough, you swallow. Yeah, kind of ruined your day there. Sorry about that. Sorry, not sorry. But as you cough, you're sending that phlegm up, and then you're going to swallow it and send it to your digestive system. So pathogens are now going to have access to the respiratory surfaces, which are pretty exposed. This is problematic. So a person typically gets chronic bronchitis, just long-term inflamed bronchioles. The bronchioles are going to thicken, resulting in difficulty in expiration. So now you have a person that's going to be wheezing. The alveoli, where gas exchange actually occurs, these are the most delicate thing, um, are going to start to be destroyed. This is going to lead to emphysema. Now, due to all this damage, cells oftentimes try to replenish themselves. When this occurs, sometimes they have unsuccessful reproduction of what they were aiming to succeed to produce. And this is going to produce a damaged cell, a mutant cell, because of the exposure to these different chemicals. And you're going to see people who smoke, you're going to see about a 20% incidence of lung cancer. Environmental tobacco smoke also endangers non-smokers, and it's even been said that people who are around non-smokers are more impacted from the smoking than the people who are smoking. I don't think that's very fair, and it's upsetting. Matter of fact, there is a law that was passed. I think it's illegal to smoke in a car with a child who is 12 or under. I think it's 12 or under. It might be 16. But isn't that crazy? In a world where we know that this is harmful, and we have laws to say, like, it's illegal to smoke around them because you could harm somebody. Yeah, yeah. All right. So the pharynx. The pharynx is going to be posterior near the nasal cavity. So go right behind that. And you have some different pharynxes that are going to be involved. So these are the air passages as you're moving down. So you have nasopharynx, so this is right behind the nose. Oropharynx, this is right behind the oral cavity. And laryngeal pharynx, which is in the larynx area. So these are the different regions of the pharynx. So let's talk about the larynx. You may have heard of words like laryngitis, and you think of a symptom of laryngitis, like people have laryngitis, their voice is like this. So why? Let's get to the why. All right. So the why, within this region, you have your vocal cords. You also have some different cartilages that are going to be there. And the vocal cords, we're going to see two different types. We'll get to that in just a minute. So let's look at the three large scale single cartilages. We have your thyroid cartilage. This is the largest. And this is, and when you reach down and feel your throat and feel the Adam's apple, that's your thyroid cartilage. Now, women also have thyroid cartilage. So if you want to call this like only guys have Adam's apples, that's not true. Everybody has thyroid cartilage. Some people's are more pronounced than others, and if you see that more prominent in men, then so be it. I don't care. But everybody has that structure, so mine is right there. I can feel it. I can go from soft tissue down to like, hey, here starts that hard stuff. Kind of uncomfortable. My thyroid gland is right on either side of it with the isthmus in between. All right, if you go just down from your thyroid cartilage, where the Adam's apple is, the next band there is going to be the cricoid cartilage. This is going to be below the thyroid cartilage, and you can see that from the posterior aspect. But something you can really see well from the posterior aspect is the epiglottic cartilage. So this is that central flap-like part of the epiglottis. So when you swallow in the back of your throat, and that cartilaginous piece that's here, swallow and fill your throat. Did you feel it? If you didn't do it, come on, don't be a chicken. Nobody can see you. You do it. So swallow. As you swallow, you notice that that thyroid cartilage moves up, and it's going to be like a hinge-like thing that's going on. And so it's like this, and as it moves up, it's going to go up and down. The epiglottic is going to fold down over your trachea, and the thyroid cartilage is going to go up. Then you're going to be finished swallowing, and it's going to go back together. So the three pairs of small cartilage, they're going to regulate the vocal folds, vocal cord tension and speech, and close the larynx for swallowing, as I was talking about. We have the retinoid, the corniculate, and the cuneiform. So let's take a look at the structure. Here is our hyoid bone. Here is our thyroid cartilage, our Adam's apple. You can see a little bit of the fringe of the epiglottic cartilage, but when you look from the posterior aspect, you can see it there. That is the big piece of the epiglottic cartilage that's going to fold over your trachea when you swallow. So if you go down, here's the cricoid cartilage, and then we start to have the rings of your trachea. There's about 20 rings there as you move down. You can see they are incomplete rings that you can see of this cartilage. So cricoid can be seen here. So most of it is posterior aspect, and you can see it move there. So when we look at those small areas within, you can see our vocal folds. So once again, we're still in the larynx. You have two pairs of vocal folds. We have the false vocal folds, which are going to be up. They're going to have no sound production. Let's take a look at that. So this is right here. This is your false vocal folds. When you swallow, this closes. You don't want this pipe open. You want everything closed. And so it's going to meet up. And so when it's closed, like this in a swallow situation, you're going to have false vocal folds that are going to help close everything up. Notice our true vocal folds. Me, 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 me. This is what the vibration is moving past. That's helping make our tonation. And if you cause this to be, let's say that you have really long vocal folds, you would have a really deep voice like this. If you have really short vocal folds, if you have really short vocal folds, these are going to be much shorter. So the difference is soprano and a bass has to do with this vocal fold here. And if you're not into music, the sopranos are the people that are singing so high, and the basses are the people that are tough. um, I sang in choir in high school and in college and after college, and my choir professor says always said this, that the tenors may make the ladies swoo, but the basses carry them home, and that stuck with me because I was a bass, and I wanted to feel like I was something. Let's get back to anatomy instead of me singing. Okay, so this area from here to here is called the glottis. Whenever you have a relaxation, the glottis is going to be open. Notice the glottis is going to have space. This is going to allow for air to move through, and people that are really into music can really get into things like glottal stroke and different things like that. But that's not this class. Let's get back to anatomy. So here's the epiglottis. We know that it's going to have the epiglottal cartilage that's going to be within. You have your hyoid bone that's going to be cut so you can see what's going on. Here's the false vocal folds, here's the true vocal folds, and here is the glottis that is closed. And you can see the cricoid cartilage, and so you can see the thyroid cartilage that's there. So it gives you an idea of essentially where this is located. So if you took this and let's say you squeezed it, it's quite uncomfortable. I don't recommend that. It's going to be changing the spacing here. And so that's why when somebody's trying to talk while being choked, I guess, why it changes that. So here is another view of this. Thyroid cartilage, once again, the epiglottis, and you can see some of it cut away to see some of the things there. This is a half section of that cross section, and you can see hyoid bone, moving of the thyroid cartilage, and then you can see some of the other smaller pieces like the corniculate. You have the arytenoid, and you have the cuneiform that's going to be up a little bit as you can go through and look at this vocal folds. All right, so the trachea. The trachea is going to be a flexible cylindrical tube. It's going to be about an inch wide, and it's going to be 12 and a half centimeters long. Um, So as we move down your trachea, eventually you're going to get to a point, it's going to be about 20 cartilage rings long, and it's going to be made of hyaline cartilage, so very low vascularization. And you can see that it's going to move down until it branches off at the hilum, where it's going to give rise to the bronchi. So it splits at the left and right primary bronchi. So, in a case of anaphylactic shock where somebody's throat has seized, or maybe they've had damage to their oropharynx or something to that effect, there's a procedure called a tracheostomy. The tracheostomy is going to go in at this area of your trachea, and it's going to make an incision, and it's going to allow for air to move through. People that have had a tracheotomy, oftentimes the way that they speak, since this area is below the vocal folds, they have to put their fingers over this to allow air to move up through the vocal folds to move out. So you can see somebody that has, they're just breathing through this, and then they want to talk, and they have to talk like this, where it's very limited in what they can do due to the airflow that's moving past those true vocal folds. When I was a kid, um, I watched a movie. It was probably a PBS movie called The Doll Maker, and I think it was Jane Fonda. I didn't even know that she was the character in it. But in this movie, this really impoverished lady, her son is dying to some kind of anaphylactic, and she takes a pin and does a makeshift tracheotomy and puts a hole in the boy's throat right there on the street and saves his life. It was quite moving. I was just a kid. I had never seen anything like that. Um, yeah, I don't know any other human other than my mother that's ever watched that. So I think the viewership might be a two. On Rotten Tomatoes, I don't think any tomatoes have ever been delivered there. It was quite moving for me as a child. So I just think about that every time I think about a tracheotomy. All right. So last night in a windstorm, I had 25% of my roof removed. Oof. You get it? I think it's funny. My roof is fine, but 25% less of the word roof is OOF. Oof. All right, so I will stick to teaching since comedy isn't working out. All right, here we go. So here's the trachea. The trachea has the hilum, which is going to fork into this area. Here's the carina. We have the left and right bronchus, and then we have sub-branches to the superior upper lobar bronchus and the middle lobar bronchus and inferior lobar bronchus. Notice that there's three on this side, the right side of the chest, and two on the left side of the chest. There's a structure that's going to be about right here that's taking up some of the surface that the left side of the chest has. That's the heart. So you only have two lobes of the lung on your left side, three lobes on your right side. Just as an overview of what we've been looking at, the larynx, the thyroid cartilage, epiglottis can't be seen right here. Here's the cricoid. You can see those C-shaped rings as it moves down. There's about 20 of them or so. Just like before, the visceral and parietal, remember my fist into the balloon touching my fist would be the visceral, kind of like saran wrap on the organ on top of it. And then on the outside of that balloon that's still continuous, would be the parietal, and the area between would be the pleural cavity. This is showing a cross section, showing the hyaline cartilage that's there of that um, trachea. All right, so the bronchial tree consists of branched airways leading to the trachea to the microscopic air sacs of the lungs. These are going to start with the trachea and they're going to branch and then kind of look like an upside down tree. So there's a pretty good image in your book. This is the image where it shows the bronchial tree. You can see trachea, the carina, right bronchus, left bronchus, superior lobar. So let's go ahead and get into those pieces. You have the right and left main primary bronchus. So these bronchi are going to be coming right off of the trachea. Sometimes people get infections here and they become inflamed. When you have an inflamed area of your body, it is considered to be itis, I-T-I-S. So when you have an inflamed bronchiole, it's called bronchitis. And so bronchitis, this is a lower respiratory infection, where if you had laryngitis, that would be an upper respiratory infection. So off of the bronchi are going to be the lobar. And the lobar are the secondary branches. And then from there, you're going to have two or three of these on each of those lobar. And then you're going to have segmental, which are going to be tertiary branches. Once again, this is a branch leading to a smaller branch, leading to several of these smaller branches from there. You also have the intralobar bronchioles. These are going to each enters a lobule. And then you have the terminal, where it all ends. So the terminal, you're going to have 40 to 80 of these on each lobule. The respiratory bronchioles are going to be the first structures to do gas exchange. That's right. Until now, we haven't done anything other than just be a passageway for air. At the respiratory bronchus, this is where you're going to have the alveoli buds. Now, the alveoli are going to have alveolar ducts, and within alveolar ducts, you're going to have the alveolar sacs, and within that, you're going to have the alveoli. Why we care? The alveoli, they're going to kind of look like clusters of grapes. So we're zooming up on an area right here, and we're really, really zooming up. You can see the capillary bed, pulmonary arterial, and notice the pulmonary arterial is deoxygenated blood. Remember, coming from the heart, this coming from the right side of the heart, right ventricle, sending this, the pulmonary trunk, the right and left pulmonary arteries away from the heart. And now we're having this gas exchange that's occurring here. So the capillary bed that's going to be there, and eventually we're going to have it oxygenated and going back. So notice how it kind of looks like clusters of grapes. And if we look, there's going to be all these different rounded surfaces. That's right, it increases surface area. So the gas exchange is going to occur here in the alveoli sec. Here's the alveolar duct, alveoli sec. This is a singular alveoli. This is where gas exchange is taking place. So the structure of the main bronchi is similar to a trachea, but they contain the cartilaginous plates instead of the C-shaped rings. As bronchi continue to branch, they become narrow, and the amount of cartilage decreases. Cartilage disappears in the bronchioles, allowing for changes in diameter, like bronchodilation and bronchioconstriction. Think of a person that's having an asthmatic attack and how they feel like they just can't breathe. They have bronchial constriction. So the bronchioles, those tubes, can change their diameter. And so now less airflow can move through. And if you ask somebody who has had an asthmatic attack what it's like, and they say it's like breathing through a straw, that's such an accurate description because they've had reduced capacity to move air through an opening by changing the diameter of the opening. So a smooth muscle becomes more prominent and begins to diminish from the bronchioles to the alveolar ducts, where it eventually disappears because this is where you have gas exchange. So as respiratory tubes become thinner, types of epithelium changes. The pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelium in the large tubes, we know this is for mucus and for moving of that stuff, the crowd surfing concept. Then we get to simple cuboidal epithelial in the respiratory bronchioles. These are essentially the rings that go around. And then we have simple squamous epithelium. Simple. Check this out. Simple, single layer. And it makes sense why it would be a single layer. Squamous, very flat. It makes sense why it'd be very flat. And this is going to be epithelium. So this is one of our epithelial types that we have in our alveoli. So it makes complete sense why we'd have this tile-like structure that's so flat and just one layer thick, because we want to have diffusion across that surface of oxygen into that area and carbon dioxide out of that area. So it's just awesome. I think the body is so freaking fascinating. Uh, it's amazing that all of this is going on. And one of the cool things is until now, you may have never realized that all this is going on right now, your whole life, in fact. So the branches of the bronchial tree are air passages. They transport air, but they don't perform gas exchange. Bronchioles don't do gas exchange. They're just a highway system. They move things in and out. There's no side pit stops that's going on, fueling or defueling or whatever. The alveoli, this is where gas exchange occurs. So only structures that contain alveoli can perform gas exchange. From respiratory bronchioles to the alveoli, during gas exchange, oxygen diffuses through the alveoli and capillary walls and enters into the blood. CO2 diffuses from the blood into the alveoli. If you remember the lymphatic system, we saw this and we looked at this interstitial fluid that's going to be flowing right there. That's going to aid in that. We're also going to have the colloid osmotic pressure that's going to be involved here, but that's not our focus point. We're just noticing that we've seen this image before. This is showing the simple squamous epithelium and the gas exchange of this deoxygenated blood, meaning it's high in CO2, low in oxygen. When it's in near an area high in oxygen, oxygen will diffuse into it. This area is low in carbon dioxide, and so carbon dioxide will diffuse into it. It'll go from high to low. So oxygen will naturally diffuse in, carbon dioxide will naturally diffuse out. And as it continues to move around, it's getting to the point that most of this is about the same on each side as the carbon dioxide is eventually. And you notice that we start to pull away. And as we pull away, we're pulling that oxygenated blood back, and it's going to go through your right and left pulmonary veins, emptying into your left atrium, going through the mitral valve into your left ventricle, getting pumped out through the through the aortic semilunar valves to your aorta. Then we're off to the races, sending this out to your system, so the tissue can have oxygen. So the lungs themselves are going to be really soft and spongy. I remember the first time I ever felt a lung, it was so squishy and soft. It surprised me. I want to say it's spongy, but it's even softer than a sponge. Like, I've touched different, cadaver parts, but a lung is unlike anything I've ever touched in a human body. It's very foreign feeling. It's squish, very squishy. All right. So separated from each other by the heart and the mediastinum. There's three lobes on the right, as we talked about, and two on the left. The hilum is going to be the region of the mediastinum where the surface of each lung through which the bronchus and the large blood vessels enter. The pleura. These are the cavities, as I mentioned before, with that balloon analogy, is the visceral pleura is on it. The parietal pleura is on the outside of the cavity, and the area in between is going to be the pleural cavity. If you have fluid building up in this region, you can do a pleurocentesis, removing that fluid from that region. So this is showing some of the structures that we've been looking at. The lower level lobe of the lung, middle, superior. This is superior and inferior. There is no middle in that one. And here's a cross section, and you can see this is the visceral, and this is the parietal, and this is going to be just the pleural cavity, the area between the visceral and the parietal. And notice at the end, it's continuous as it loops around. So the balloon analogy of how it's take a round balloon and put your fist into it, very similar to that concept of those different cavities. You can see the same thing with the pericardial cavity and the pleural cavity. All right, lung irritants. You've heard of asbestos before, and you may not know what asbestos is. Asbestos was used as a building material. It's a naturally occurring mineral, so this isn't the devil by any means. It's just a mineral that doesn't really burn much, and so it was great for building whenever they found it, that it was useful. The only problem is that when you tear it up, it tends to go airborne. And then when people breathe in those airborne particles, it damages the lung and causes scarring. And then a person doesn't have the same pleural capacity due to the scarring of the alveoli. And whenever those cells try to regenerate, oftentimes it develops something called mesothelioma, which is going to be a cancer of the pleura. Berylliosis is referring to the element beryllium. So this is used in some industrial applications. Some people, when you're exposed to this dust or vapor, it's going to evoke an immune response and scar the lungs and impair breathing. All right, extrinsic allergic alveolitis. This is long-term exposure to dust of organic origin. So this is you breathing in, staying at your factory, breathing in this horrible air. This can cause acute fever, breathing impairments, and chronic changes to your lungs over time. Air pollutions are really, really fine. They're measured in ppms or ppbs. This is parts per million or parts per billion, million or billion. These are going to be really fine particles that are in the air that oftentimes reach the alveoli. This may worsen things like asthma, uh, irritate eyes and lungs, and increase the risk of heart disease and lung cancer. All right, hate to end on that note, but we're now finished with that section. I look forward to seeing you soon.